February 14, 1945. North Sea Coast, RAF Coastal Command Airfield, Eastern England. 6 Lancaster bombers sat on the hardstand, engines cold. Bomb bay doors were open. Ground crews moved between the aircraft, loading ordnance under work lights that cast long shadows across the concrete. The loads were not standard. Each aircraft carried a combination of 4,000-pound blockbusters and incendiary canisters. The munitions were being positioned with particular care. 62 aircrew members stood in the briefing room. They wore flight suits and vests. Maps covered the walls. Target photographs had been distributed. The briefing had concluded 18 minutes earlier. The mission commander, a wing commander whose logbook showed 41 previous operations, stood near the door. He held a clipboard. He did not speak. The men waited. Outside, fuel trucks had finished topping off the tanks. Oxygen systems had been checked. Ammunition belts were loaded into the gun turrets. Navigation equipment had been calibrated. Meteorological data had been updated. The aircraft were ready. Takeoff was scheduled for 18:30 hours. Current time, 18:17. The aircrew remained standing. Some adjusted their gear. Others stared at the maps. No one sat down. No one left the room. The wing commander looked at his watch, then at the door. His expression showed nothing. 13 minutes remained. The target was a port facility on the German Baltic coast, Swinemünde, at the mouth of the Oder River. Intelligence reports indicated the harbor was being used to evacuate German military personnel and equipment from the Eastern Front as Soviet forces advanced westward. The port had functioning docks, rail connections, and significant concentration of shipping. Bomber Command had designated it a legitimate military target supporting enemy operations. The mission had been planned for 3 days. Weather reconnaissance confirmed acceptable conditions over the target area, broken cloud at 8,000 feet, visibility adequate for visual bombing. The route would take the formation northeast across the North Sea, then east along the Danish coast before turning south toward the target. Total flight time, approximately 4 hours. Return by the same route. Expected opposition, moderate flak, possible night fighter activity. The Lancaster bombers assigned to the mission were from 2 squadrons, one from 5 Group, one from 8 Group. All were experienced crews. Average number of operations completed, 23. They had bombed targets in Germany, occupied France, and Norway. They understood the procedures. They had survived thus far through skill, coordination, and the statistical probability that had favored them over others who had not returned. The mission order had been transmitted from Bomber Command Headquarters at 14:00 hours. Group Headquarters had assigned the squadrons at 14:30. Squadron commanders had briefed their flight crews at 16:45. Navigation routes were plotted. Bomb loads were specified. Radio frequencies were assigned. Recognition signals were established. Everything proceeded according to standard operational procedure. The briefing room had been tense but routine. Target photographs showed dense urban development surrounding the port facilities. The wing commander had emphasized aiming points, docks, warehousing, rail marshalling yards. He had noted civilian areas adjacent to military installations, but stated that the port infrastructure was the priority. Crews had asked standard questions about flak positions, fighter bases, and weather alternates. All questions had been answered. The briefing concluded at 17:59. Crews were dismissed to prepare for takeoff. Now they stood, waiting for the order to proceed to aircraft. RAF Bomber Command doctrine in early 1945 emphasized strategic disruption of German war-making capacity. Targets included industrial facilities, transportation networks, oil production, and military infrastructure. Port facilities fell clearly within this mandate. Swinemünde supported German military operations in the east. Its destruction would impede evacuation efforts and disrupt logistics. The mission fit established targeting policy. Crew training emphasized precision and discipline. Navigators were responsible for routing and timing. Bomb aimers controlled weapons release. Pilots maintained formation and altitude. Gunners provided defensive fire. Radio operators managed communications. Flight engineers monitored systems. Each role was defined. Each crew member understood his function within the larger operation. The wing commander had flown with several of the crews on previous missions. He knew their capabilities and their limits. He trusted them to execute as briefed. The formation would approach the target at 15,000 feet. The lead aircraft would mark the aiming point with flares. Following aircraft would bomb on the markers. The entire attack would last approximately 12 minutes, then withdraw westward at maximum sustainable speed. Weather conditions were acceptable but not ideal. Cloud cover would provide some concealment during approach, but would also complicate target identification. Visual bombing required clear sight of the aiming point. If cloud obscured the target, the mission would proceed using H-2S radar guidance. Accuracy would be reduced, but the mission would still achieve its objective of damaging the port facilities. Expected losses were calculated at standard rates, 5 to 8%. For a force of 6 aircraft, that meant statistically one crew might not return. This was understood. Losses were inevitable. The mission would proceed regardless. The objective outweighed the risk. This calculation was routine. It formed the foundation of all operational planning. The men standing in the briefing room knew this. They had accepted it when they volunteered for aircrew duty. They had reaffirmed it with each mission completed. Tonight's operation was not exceptional. It was one more sortie in a campaign that had been ongoing for years. They would fly, bomb, and return, or they would not return. Either outcome was possible and anticipated. At 18:21, a staff car pulled up outside the briefing room. A group captain emerged. He carried a folder. He entered the building quickly. The wing commander met him at the door. They spoke briefly. Voices were too low to hear. The conversation lasted perhaps 20 seconds. The wing commander turned to face the assembled crews. He said, "Mission canceled." No explanation followed. He repeated it once. "The mission is canceled." Then he instructed crews to stand down and return to quarters. Aircraft would be unloaded. Normal schedule would resume tomorrow. Silence held for several seconds. No one moved. Then one navigator asked why. The wing commander said he had no additional information. Orders from group. The mission would not proceed tonight, that was all. The crews remained standing. Faces showed confusion, then relief, then confusion again. The shift from imminent danger to safety had occurred too abruptly to process. Men looked at each other. Some began removing flight gear slowly. Others stayed motionless, still holding maps and navigation logs. The wing commander left the room. The group captain followed. Outside, ground crews were already being instructed to remove munitions from the aircraft. Work lights continued illuminating the hardstand. The bombers sat empty, engines still cold. Time, 18:24. 6 minutes before scheduled takeoff. The mission had ended before beginning. The aircrew dispersed gradually. Some returned to their quarters immediately. Others lingered near the briefing room, smoking, discussing the cancellation in low voices. No coherent explanation emerged. Speculation filled the gap. Weather had deteriorated, intelligence had changed, higher priorities had superseded the mission. No one knew. No official word followed the initial cancellation order. Ground crews continued unloading the aircraft. The process was slow and careful. Ordnance could not be rushed. Each bomb was removed, inspected, and returned to storage. Incendiary canisters were particularly delicate. The work continued under lights as darkness settled fully over the airfield. Estimated completion time, 3 hours. In the operations room, duty officers monitored communications channels. No incoming messages explained the cancellation. The original mission order remained on file. No amended order superseded it. The cancellation had been verbal, transmitted through command channels but not documented in writing. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Operational circumstances sometimes changed rapidly. Written orders could not always keep pace. The wing commander spoke briefly with his squadron commanders. They asked if the mission would be rescheduled. He said he did not know. They asked if targets had been reassigned. He said he had received no further instructions. The conversation ended. Squadron commanders returned to their units and informed their crews that tomorrow's schedule was uncertain. Normal readiness procedures would continue. Further orders would be issued when available. Mess halls filled with aircrew who had expected to be airborne. Conversations were subdued. The sudden transition from operational tension to routine evening produced a psychological disorientation. Men who had mentally prepared for combat now found themselves eating dinner and drinking tea. The shift felt incomplete. There had been no resolution, no climax, no release of the energy that had been building toward takeoff. By 21:00 hours, most personnel had retired to quarters. The airfield settled into routine night operations. The 6 Lancasters sat on the hardstand, empty and silent. The mission that had been approved, planned, briefed, and prepared in every detail had simply ceased to exist. And no explanation had been provided. The cancellation order originated from Bomber Command Headquarters. A signal transmitted at 18:05 hours directed all operations against Baltic ports to be suspended pending further notice. The signal was brief and contained no justification. Group headquarters relayed the order immediately to operational squadrons. The wing commander received it at 12 minutes before scheduled takeoff. The reason for the suspension was later understood to involve intelligence received that afternoon regarding the composition of shipping in Swinemünde harbor. Reports indicated that, in addition to military transports, the port contained vessels carrying civilians, refugees fleeing the Soviet advance. The concentration of refugee shipping was significantly higher than previous intelligence had suggested. This information created a targeting complication. RAF policy distinguished between military and civilian objectives, though the line was often unclear in practice. Ports used for military evacuation were legitimate targets. However, attacks that would predictably cause mass civilian casualties required higher-level authorization and assessment of military necessity. The intelligence regarding refugee concentrations triggered a review process at Bomber Command Headquarters. That review was not completed before the scheduled mission time. Rather than proceed with an operation that might later be determined to have violated targeting policy, Command Authority chose to suspend all Baltic port missions until the review concluded. This was a procedural decision based on incomplete information and command discretion. It was not an evaluation of the morality or legality of the attack. It was simply a determination that further information was required before proceeding. The wing commander understood this only in general terms. He knew the cancellation came from higher authority. He knew it involved the target, not technical or weather factors. He did not know the specific intelligence that prompted the decision. That information was not transmitted to operational level. He received an order to cancel. He complied. This was standard command structure. The crews understood even less. They knew only that a mission had been canceled at the last moment. This had happened before for various reasons, whether intelligence updates, operational priorities. The specific cause was rarely explained to aircrew. They executed orders. The reasons behind those orders were determined at levels above their awareness. This was accepted practice in military operations. The following morning, operational schedules resumed normal patterns. Missions were briefed for other targets in Germany. The 6 Lancasters that had been prepared for Swinemünde were assigned to different operations. Crews flew against marshalling yards, oil refineries, and troop concentrations. The rhythm of operations continued without interruption. No further missions were scheduled against Swinemünde. The target disappeared from operational planning. Whether the intelligence review concluded that the target was unsuitable or whether changing battlefield conditions made the port irrelevant was not communicated to squadron level. The target simply stopped appearing in mission orders. Crews did not discuss the cancellation in detail. It became one incident among many in the continuous cycle of briefings, missions, and stand-downs that characterized operational life. Some remembered it as the mission that was called off at the last minute. Others forgot it entirely within days. There was no reason to dwell on operations that did not occur. Attention focused on missions that did proceed and the constant preparation for the next operation. Ground crews returned the unused ordnance to storage. The munitions would be loaded onto other aircraft for other targets. Nothing was wasted. The bombs that had been prepared for the port on the Baltic coast would eventually be dropped somewhere else. The specific target mattered less than the continuous application of force against the enemy. This was the operational logic that governed all activities. The wing commander filed no report on the cancellation. No report was required. Missions that did not occur generated no documentation beyond the initial order and its cancellation. The administrative record showed only that a mission scheduled for February 14 was canceled. No explanation was attached. The gap in the archive was structural, not exceptional. By February 16, the incident had receded into the background. New missions occupied attention. The war continued. The airfield operated at full capacity. The cancellation was forgotten by nearly everyone who had been involved. Official RAF operational records for February 14, 1945, note missions flown against targets in Western Germany. Swinemünde does not appear in the listings. The cancelled mission exists only in squadron operational record books, where it is noted briefly. Mission to Swinemünde, cancelled 1821 hours. No amplifying information is provided. Bomber Command Headquarters files contain the original mission order and the cancellation signal. The intelligence assessment that prompted the cancellation was classified and remains partially redacted in archived documents. The decision-making process at command level was not formally documented. Standard practice did not require written justification for operational decisions made within command discretion. Post-war analyses of RAF bombing operations in early 1945 focus on major campaigns: Dresden, Berlin, oil targets, transportation networks. Swinemünde is mentioned in some accounts as a target attacked by other forces on other dates. The February 14 cancelled mission does not appear in historical literature. It had no outcome to analyze. It generated no casualties, no damage assessment, no tactical or strategic impact. It simply did not occur. The individuals involved left no personal records of the incident. Logbooks maintained by aircrew record missions flown, not missions canceled. The wing commander's service record shows operations conducted, but makes no mention of operations suspended. Post-war memoirs written by Bomber Command personnel occasionally reference canceled missions in general terms but provide no specific examples. The event lacked the narrative elements that make incidents memorable. No danger experienced, no action taken, no resolution achieved. The silence is complete. The mission was approved, prepared in full detail, and then canceled minutes before execution. That cancellation left no trace beyond administrative notation. The bombs intended for the port were eventually dropped elsewhere. The crews flew other missions. The target was attacked by different forces at different times, and the specific moment when violence was prepared and then withheld disappeared into the vast category of things that almost happened but did not. The wing commander completed his tour of operations in March 1945 and returned to training duties. He remained in the RAF after the war and retired as a group captain in 1958. His service record notes competent leadership and successful completion of assigned operations. He did not write memoirs. He died in 1976. His family donated his personal papers to an aviation museum, but the collection contains no reference to the Swinemünde mission. Of the 62 aircrew members prepared to fly that night, 14 were killed in subsequent operations before the war ended. 18 were wounded or shot down and became prisoners. The remaining 30 completed their tour and returned to civilian life. None left written accounts that mention February 14, 1945, specifically. When interviewed decades later for oral history projects, Several mentioned canceled missions as part of operational routine, but could not recall details or dates. The squadron commanders involved both survived the war. One remained in the RAF and commanded a bomber squadron during the Berlin airlift. The other left the service and worked in civil aviation. Neither discussed the canceled mission in documented conversations or correspondence. It was one operational decision among thousands they had witnessed or participated in during years of continuous combat operations. Ground crew members who loaded and then unloaded the aircraft remembered the incident, if at all, as an unusually late cancellation. The work was physically demanding and procedurally careful, but not exceptional. They had loaded and unloaded aircraft hundreds of times. One specific instance held no particular significance. Swinemünde itself was attacked by other forces, Soviet air units and later American bombers, in subsequent weeks. The port was heavily damaged. Casualty figures from those attacks were high and included substantial civilian losses. Whether the canceled RAF mission would have produced similar results, or whether the target situation on February 14 differed from later conditions, cannot be determined. The mission did not occur. The comparison is hypothetical. The airfield in eastern England no longer exists as a military installation. It was decommissioned in the 1950s and returned to agricultural use. Sections of the runway remain visible from aerial photographs, but most structures have been removed. No memorial marks the location. The site is unremarkable, flat land near the coast, identical to surrounding farmland. February 14, 1945 was one day among thousands of operational days during the war. Hundreds of missions were flown that day across multiple theaters. Some succeeded, some failed, some were canceled. The specific circumstances of each were recorded or not recorded according to operational necessity and administrative procedure. Canceled missions generated minimal documentation. They had no outcomes to assess, no lessons to extract, no casualties to account for. The mission that was approved and then suddenly canceled left no physical trace. The bombs were never dropped. The aircraft never flew. The crews never faced the dangers they had prepared for. The target was attacked by others at other times. The port was destroyed. The war ended. The individuals involved dispersed into civilian life or remained in service and participated in other operations. What did not happen required no explanation and left no monument. The decision to cancel was made within normal command authority based on information available at the time. The crews stood down. The aircraft were unloaded. The moment passed, and the mission dissolved into silence. The silence of archives that record only what occurred, not what was prevented or withheld. The gap in the record is the only evidence that remains. A brief notation of cancellation, no details provided, no further action taken, no memory preserved.